Hello, and welcome back to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and today we are tackling the text tool. We're going to start looking at some of the advanced character settings that are available in the text tool. And if you look at the text menu here, what we're talking about today is baseline shift, tracking, superscript, and all the way down here, line spacing. And the first three of these are also available in the character settings window. You can see not only do you have font and typeface, size, and style, you have your baseline superscript and tracking numbers here as well. So you could do this all at once in one shot when you set up your text block to begin with. So let's start talking about tracking first. Now, with all of these adjustments, we can, I should say all except the line spacing, we can do these all at once by either highlighting the whole text block or just highlighting the handle and making a change, or we could do partial text blocks. So if I wanted to make a change to the tracking just for the first word, we can do it like that. For now, let's just talk about tracking on the whole. Oh, and the last thing I want to mention is that anything that you can do with these things, baseline shift, tracking, superscript, line spacing, all of this is available anywhere that you can create text in Finale. So not just the text tool, but like in the expression tool, if you want to make adjustments to your staff labels or your part names, anywhere that there's a text option in Finale, these things will be available. So all of this applies to all of that as well. So let's start looking at tracking. And for now, I'm just going to highlight the whole thing, and we're going to go to tracking. And I suppose if you're not familiar with tracking, what you need to understand is tracking is basically the space, the horizontal space between each letter of the font. Now, every font is built with a built-in tracking. So to start, this is a 0 tracking, but that doesn't mean that there's 0 space between each letter. It just means that it's the default space between each letter set by that font design, basically. But in Finale, we can add to the tracking by using an amount here. And it doesn't really tell you what amount you're adding or what unit of amount you're adding. And so I know what this is. This is measured in EMs. And an EM is 1/1000th of a point size, so or a relative point size. So if this is 12-point font, which it is, 1,000 EMs is 12 points of distance. If it was a 14-point font, then 1,000 EMs would be 14 points. So if I set this to 1,000, basically what I'm doing is I'm putting 12 points between each letter, or 12 extra points between each letter. So if you were to imagine this T flipping over to its side and fitting in the space between the T and the R, that's exactly what's going on, because there's 12 points of space, or 1,000 EMs. So you don't have to use 1,000 here. You can use any number that you want. If you did a number like 500, you would get half of that tracking, and you can see it get a little smaller than that. And these numbers can also be negative, but you got to be careful with negative tracking numbers, because eventually the letters will start to overlap. So if I do something like -200, you'll see that doesn't look very good. But we could do, this depends on the font too, and the natural tracking that the font has. With Times New Roman, you probably don't want to go much farther than -100. That's what -100 looks like. So there you go, and we'll just set this back to 0. And once again, we can do this individually for words, or even part of a word. If you wanted to just do something with those 3 letters, we can do a tracking here of 500 just for that, and you can go on your way. So let's talk about baseline shifts next. And in order to understand what this is, you got to know that every text line will have a baseline. It's just about at the bottom of the text. And we can change that baseline if we need to make the lines themselves or the words themselves go higher or lower relative to that baseline. So in this case, I'm going to just select the word baseline here. I'm going to go into my baseline shift, and this gives me another amount. Now, this is not measured in EMs. This is actually measured in the units that you're using in your preferences. So in my case, I'm using inches. So the amount that I'm doing here is going to be in inches, not in EMs. And with these baseline shifts, you don't want to get too large. So if I do something like 0.1, you'll see how far up that goes. So you can be very subtle with these numbers. And you can see kind of what occurs when this happens. The highlighting point, interestingly, doesn't move with the letters, but the letters do. And you can even see the letters go outside of the the frame of the text block there. So in certain circumstances, you do have to be careful with these baseline shifts. If we go back here, we'll see that amount of baseline shift. We can reset that. These baseline shifts can also be negative. So if I do something like negative 0.05, you'll see that it gets a little bit closer to the word shift there. And of course, we could do this on the second word too. If we wanted to bring that one upwards, we can do positive 0.05 to get the same result, essentially, just kind of shifted differently within the text block, though, which can sometimes be important depending on if you have a border there or not. So that's what's going on. And again, these numbers are actual values. They are relative. They will scale with whatever you're scaling. So, even though I put 0.05, if I were to scale the whole page to 50%, it would end up being 0.025. So these baseline shifts are indeed scalable with the fonts and everything. Now, where baseline shifts are really come into play is when you're mixing music characters with text, and you can see this this monstrosity that I've created here just to illustrate this. The baselines for music characters in Finale and all the other notation programs, for that matter, have to be placed in a position that helps it get put on the staff in the correct spot. So in this instance, if you kind of like were to draw a line along the bottom of the word baseline here and go off to the left, you can kind of see that that would intersect where the G line would be on the staff. So that's why this treble clef is sort of sitting where it does on the baseline. This baseline for this first line is completely one line. It's not like I moved the baseline for these characters, right? If you go off to the right, you can see that it kind of would intersect with the F line of the bass clef staff, which is where this bass clef would sit. So these music characters are designed this way on purpose, but it does cause these types of issues when you're trying to mix music characters with text. The other issue is that I didn't add any baseline to this, or baseline shift to this word shift. It just got pushed down here because the music characters themselves, in addition to having these unique baselines, also have a lot of extra stuff going on here. And the way that fonts work when you enter a second line is that it's got to be away from the whole character. So if you draw an invisible line underneath the treble clef here, that shift word is getting out of the way of that invisible horizontal line. So when you mix characters, this is what's going on. So this is where this baseline shift comes in handy, and you can do things like, change the baseline shift of that bass clef. Let's make this, I think, 0.1. Maybe a bit too high. Maybe 0.08. There we go. And that will kind of put these things in line to our eye anyway, a lot better. And we can take the word shift here and kind of nestle that in upwards a little bit, maybe 0.2. Ooh, that's too much. Maybe 0.15. Yeah, that's a little bit better. So you can kind of see that when you're dealing with music characters mixed with text fonts, this is the kind of stuff that you're going to have to do. You're going to have to manipulate these baseline shifts a little bit to get them to kind of line up the way you want them to look to your eye. And then let's look at Superscript. Now, Superscript is very similar to baseline shift, and you can see here I've got this font, which I've set to 14 point, and this little 2 here, just this one character here, is set to, I think that's 10. Yep. And what I want to do is make this a superscript so it looks like Superscript squared. And all we're going to do is go to Superscript, and we get the same window that we would get in baseline shift. Again, this is measured in the units that is set in your preferences, so in my case, inches. And this works exactly the same way as baseline shift. You just enter an amount here, 0.05, and you'll see your character go above the line there. We can also do that with a 3. If we want to do a negative superscript, we can do that as well. Just set it to negative 0.05, and you'll see that you'll get a negative superscript. Now, there's a slight difference between the baseline shift and the superscript. In fact, in that last operation you just saw this second line here go down a little bit. That's one of the main differences between the superscript shift and the baseline shift, is that the superscript will actually change sort of the relative point of how the next line appears, and it will also actually extend the text block itself, the text frame itself. I don't know if you noticed it, but when I did the 2, this text frame just bumped up just a little bit, which can be important if you're dealing with things like borders around these text blocks. So it's kind of works the same way, but it's also very subtle in the differences that you can do here. The other thing is that we can also combine baseline shifts with Superscript. So I'm going to take this one now and do a baseline shift on the whole thing of 0.05 to get that back to where it was, and then take the Superscript and do a Superscript shift of 0.05 as well. So you can get these things exactly where you want them. You can even do it on the same line if you really want to. So I can take this whole thing, even with the Superscript, and add another baseline shift to get that like this. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of like getting these words and either individually or per line or whatever you need to do on different lines, on different baselines, and with different superscripts and everything. So now, I think I mentioned this, but all of these things, baseline, tracking, and superscript, you can apply them all at once if you just select the handle, and in this case, just choose tracking and reset that to 0, and you'll see that it will go back to 0 for the whole thing. So it is possible to do this without actually highlighting the words. And then let's talk about line spacing. Now, line spacing works a little bit different than baseline, superscript, and tracking in that you can't partially do line spacing. So you can't actually select 2 lines here and just change the line spacing. If you did this, it would apply to the entire text block. So in this way, it actually doesn't matter what you highlight. In fact, it's just as easy to just only select the handle there and then choose the line spacing. And in the text menu, the line spacing is all the way down here, and it has the shortcut Shift-Command-L on a Mac. And when we open that up, we get this window, and you have 2 options for this. You have the automatic and the absolute. And the automatic will work very similar to like a word processor that you're probably familiar with. You've got, single spacing, 1.5 spacing, double spacing. So it's easy enough to just, choose one of these, double spacing, and you'll see the whole text block change to double spacing. If you don't want to use single, half, or a double, you can choose a custom spacing. So just choose other and then literally put in whatever percentage you want there. It's 175%, and it will set to 175%. Now there's another option there for absolute, and this will give you a few different options as to the line spacing choices, and you can choose your unit of whatever you want to do. So if I were to choose inches, I could make this line spacing in inches, EVPUs, centimeters, whatever you want to do. And then there's also points, so you can set the line spacing based on the font size of the point, and it will be fixed to that. So if I were to choose this 18 points absolute line spacing, essentially what you're getting is an 18-point line spacing between. It's as if the font itself was 18 points, but the characters in the text block are actually 14 points. So that's what's going on there. It's giving you 18-point line spacing with 14-point text. Again, this is all scalable, just like tracking, baseline, and superscript. Everything that you do with line spacing is scalable. So if you were to, change the size of the page, for example, the tracking would also, or the line spacing would also change as well. Just to show this, there we go. See the text gets larger, but also the line space gets relatively larger as well. And so so that's all there is to know about tracking, baseline shift, superscript, and line spacing. Some advanced options for designing your text blocks. And again, it will apply to other areas too. So expressions and anywhere else that you can actually enter text, all of these things are available to you. So, all right, so once again, thanks for watching. My name is Jason. This has been Tackling the Text Tool. And the next video we're going to focus on the fixed size text font, which gets a little hairy and gets a little complicated. So stay tuned for that and hold your hats for that one. So thanks so much for watching. My name is Jason. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you soon on the next video.